Hello, boys and girls, and those who bounce in between. It's Comrade Dankey here with a look into a channel that I used to watch all the time. I used to watch this guy every single day, and it was where I got a whole lot of my news from. But, there are some problematic elements. David Pakman. I feel I would be remiss if I didn't point out. But that being said, I like the guy. I think he's a nice guy. But I think he is sort of mistaken in some of his criticisms of the left, and especially the far left. I could go into how he is a social democrat. He doesn't really believe in the overthrow of capitalism or the establishment of a proletarian dictatorship. But he also has stuff like this, where he has interviews with economist Richard Wolff, who is a prominent Marxist economist. So credit where credit is due, David Pakman can help sort of introduce people to more progressive ideas. For example, it's sort of like a reverse Pewdie pipeline, as it were. David Pakman introduces me to like Richard Wolff or like somebody like Sam Cedar. Sam Cedar introduces me to Michael Brooks. Michael Brooks introduces me to, like the politics behind Brazil and Lula and Bolsonaro. And I start reading about imperialism. I start reading about neocolonialism. And, next thing you know, your old friend Dankey's here is a Marxist. I start reading theory. I start devouring theory. And, haven't stopped since. So, all that said, let's get into the big thing that David Pakman said that caused a lot of grief.
We've been talking about this new wave of members of Congress, men, women, Muslims, Christians, immigrants, American-born people, and it's great. We want a wider range of views and perspectives and backgrounds in the House of Representatives. There's been a concern.
I would, um, I don't want to be one of those guys, but I would say we don't really want a wide range. We just want a range going in the right direction. I don't think should be any seat at the table for corporatists or capitalists. But of course that's just me speaking as the filthy ML that I am.
That the lack of experience that some of these individuals have may be leading to some bad ideas being floated and missteps, and that could be a problem for.
All right, so let's look at this banner. Rep Omar's anti-Semitic tweets.
Democrats in the long
Just
run.
keep
And
this in
one of the
mind
people
when David's trying to say that he didn't accuse Representative Omar of being anti-Semitic. Keep this in mind. Burn this image into your brain, okay? And ask yourself, you know, just ask yourself, does David's excuse make sense?
that is having a growing list of these problems is Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. And 2 weeks ago, I pointed out to you that her idea of a 90% marginal tax rate on the 1%, meaning
that sounds pretty darn good to me, bro. A marginal 90% tax rate, that would be incredible. We would have a huge amount of tax income that could go to social programs that could really boost the quality of life for the working class in this country.
starting at $421,000 a year. Not only was it not politically feasible, it also wasn't backed by economic data. It muddied the waters when we should really be looking at something like what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has proposed.
Which I believe her tax plan would tax the top brackets at 70%, which is pretty mild. David saying it doesn't make economic sense, I think, is idiotic. How much money do the fucking elites need in this country? You think it's going to hurt the economy? I mean, what's going to hurt the economy more? Keeping the vast majority of Americans poor as shit, or just keeping a few Americans at the top rich as shit? I mean, you know, obviously, uh, increasing the collective wealth of the masses would bring us more economic prosperity, not only in the short run, but in the long run too. So I don't know why David's against a 90% marginal tax rate on the top rich of our country that have exploited the shit out of all of us. But that's social democrats for you.
The general defense I heard from people in the audience was David, Ilhan Omar was just spitballing. It's not a specific policy proposal. Don't be so hard on her. Fine. Over the weekend, she put out a series of tweets referencing some common anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish conspiracy to self-enrich and dual loyalty to Israel. And she's already in the position of having to apologize after being criticized even by high-ranking Democrats in the House.
Okay, but keep in mind, like, the accusations of a dual loyalty to Israel in many cases are not unfounded. In many cases, these lobbyists have direct ties to Israel. Lobbies like AIPAC that lobby on behalf of the nation of Israel for U.S. support and various things like, oh, I don't know, the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Stuff like that massively destabilizes relationships between the Israeli and Palestinian people. And so I'm not sure why David is sort of against Omar calling this out, because it's obvious that this occurs. It's obvious that here in the United States we are pretty much using Israel as an extension of our own authority in the Middle East. And as sick as it might seem, we are propping up this sort of apartheid Israeli far right regime in the uh, in the West Bank and in the state of Israel as a whole.
House of Representatives. Her first tweet was a quote of Glenn Greenwald's.
All right, so Glenn Greenwald says GOP leader Kevin McCarthy threatens punishment for Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib over their comments, over their criticisms of Israel. It's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation, even if it means attacking the free speech rights of Americans. And I mean, that's a pretty darn good point. That's a really muy caliente, spicy hot pepper of a point. Keep in mind, Ilhan Omar is from Palestine, you idiots. So of course she's not going to have a fucking favorable view of Israel, who even to this day is practicing apartheid and neo-colonialism. It's horrible. So Ilhan Omar says it's all about the Benjamins, baby. It's not her fucking fault that all the chuds think that the Jews control the World Bank and all that stupid shit. But in this case, it is all about the Benjamins. The global capitalist system perpetuates the system of apartheid and oppression seen in Israel, and we here at the United States, our politicians are completely bought and paid for by the Israeli lobby, and as we can see, even the Democratic establishment gargles Israel's balls. So they throw Ilhan under the fucking bus, the party that says we're the party of progressives and diversity and women and minorities. When you have a woman minority offering a diverse opinion, she gets her ass thrown under the bus and stabbed in the back by the very party that welcomed her with open arms. So now David is sort of participating in this dog pile on Ilhan Omar. Like I said, it's not her fucking fault that all the chuds have these stupid anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how the Jews control the World Bank and all that shit. You know, because white people also aren't rich as fuck and control vast swaths of corporations and industries. You know, I don't know why they only think that Jews are the people who want money, but in this case, it happens to be true. Doesn't mean that Jews are naturally greedy or whatever. It just means that these specific people, these Israeli lobbyists, and the American politicians that accept their donations and pass legislation on their behalf are all about the Benjamins, baby. That's all she's saying, David. The only one attributing anti Semitic content to what she's saying here are people like you and people like the right wing and the bought and paid for pathetic Democratic establishment. And ask yourself, do you really want to be on their fucking side instead of Ilhan Omar?
With the note added saying it's all about the Benjamin's baby. And the tweet from Glenn Greenwald was about Republican leader Kevin McCarthy threatening punishment for Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib over criticisms of Israel. And what Ilhan Omar responded with was, it's all about the Benjamin's baby, meaning that the reason Kevin McCarthy is threatening them is because of money related to Israel. Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
I mean, is there any fucking doubt that that's the case? You think these people are censoring Ilhan Omar because why? What other reason would they have? Jesus Christ, David Pakman, use your big brain and apply some logic to this situation.
Many people saw nothing wrong with this, but as we've seen a number of worthy commentators mention, including normal Trump critic Brian Klass.
I don't care what Brian Klass has to say. Brian Klass can kiss my ass. He was wrong. He was wrong about Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitic tendencies. Sorry your little fucking narrative of this progressive Palestinian that shits on Jews didn't work out. Because I know you wanted to fucking milk that for all it was worth. And take this time to shit on real progressive movements. Even though you kowtow to them when they don't have power. You know, when you finally have a progressive trying to implement a 90% marginal tax plan on the rich and talk shit about Israeli imperialism in Palestine, well, then it's suddenly crickets. It's suddenly silence. Suddenly you're shitting all over her and stabbing her in the back. What kind of fucking progressive are you, David Pakman?
This is a reference to an anti-Semitic trope. When it comes to Israel, it's all about Jewish money from the U.S. in defense of Israel. But that same logic isn't applied to other countries and people of other national origins. When American Muslims are questioned,
I mean, you could make the same argument about, like, South Korea, for example. But let's just look at American donations to Israel. Because apparently David Pakman doesn't seem to fucking understand. Under the terms of the MOU, the United States pledges to provide $38 billion in military aid, $33 billion in foreign military financing grants, plus $5 billion in missile defense appropriations to Israel. Let's just look at this little website here, U.S. Foreign Aid by Country. Alright, so it looks like the number one spending is in Iraq. Number two, Israel, $3.2 billion. Average income rank, 3.2 billion. I don't know what that. Alright, so let's look. Department of Defense, Foreign Military Financing Program. It says payment wave, so I don't know. United Israel Appeal, funding to respond effectively to the emergency and ongoing assistance needs of Jewish humanitarian migrants from former Soviet Union, East Europe, blah, 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 blah. Some kind of Christian Brothers conference. You know, it's just we have all this fucking stuff that we're giving to Israel here by country. And let's just use Germany, for example. How much are we giving? Let's just look and see how much we're giving to Germany. All right. So Germany, we're giving $79 million on average to an average country. All right. This is the average right here. Israel's way the fuck up here. Okay, David? Does this clear it up for you at all? Does this kind of explain to you the extreme overbearing nature by which the United States spends money with Israel? I mean, does that kind of clear it up? It's not just that we give money to a whole bunch of countries evenly. It's overwhelmingly going to Israel. That's not an accusation of anti-Semitism. That's not saying that the Jews are greedy and that they're getting all of our money. But it is saying that the U.S. gives a shit ton of money to Israel to oppress the Palestinians. Omar's people, where she came from.
About whether their loyalty is to the U.S. or to their country of family origin, for example, whether it's Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or whatever, we say that's Islamophobic, rightly so. But when the same is said about the influence of American Jewish money on politics.
But when we're talking about Jewish lobbyists and Jewish people trying to fund American politicians to pass pro-Zionist, pro-Israel legislation, yes, that is directly what the fuck are you even talking about, David? This is, Israeli nationalists funding the U.S. to fund Israel so that they can oppress the Palestinians. This, it's not a difficult issue, David. I don't know why he's having so much trouble grasping this. He's being deliberately obtuse about this entire thing.
It's Israel, and we're supposed to pretend like these aren't just two sides of the same coin. Now, I'll get to Kevin McCarthy in this in a second, but let's look at the second tweet from Ilhan Omar first.
All right, so Batya Ungar Sargon, cool name, says, would love to know who Ilhan MN thinks is paying American politicians to be pro-Israel. Though I think I can guess. Bad form, Congresswoman. That's the second anti-Semitic trope you've tweeted. All right, she says AIPAC. I mean, but let's look. Let's look at AIPAC. Because this isn't anti-Semitic if it's fucking true. Just like if there was, and forgive me for this analogy, but just like if there was a Mexican person who was lazy. Just because there's a Mexican person who's lazy doesn't prove the stereotype is true, but it does mean in that instance that yes, the Mexican person was lazy. The same exact thing happens here. The stereotype is that the Jews lobby the Americans. But of course, we know. Let's see. Size. History. Goals. AIPAC strongly supports substantial U.S. aid to Israel. In March 2009, for example, AIPAC Director Howard Kaur appeared before House Committee of Appropriations Foreign Operations Subcommittee and requested that Israel receive $2.775 billion in military aid for the fiscal year 2010. as called for in the 2007 Memorandum of Understanding between the U.S. and Israel that allocates $30 billion in aid for the Jewish state over 10 years. The military hardware Israel must purchase to face increased threat of Islamist radicalism is increasingly expensive due to the recent spike in petroleum prices, which have enabled countries such as Iran to augment, once again, drumming up the war drums with Iran. In 2012, AIPAC called for crippling sanctions against Iran in a letter to every member of U.S. Congress. In line with this approach, AIPAC has lobbied to levy economic embargoes and increase sanctions against Iran, uh, known as the Nuclear Weapons Free Iran Act of 2013. AIPAC has also supported the funding of a number of Israeli military projects that have resulted in new addition to the arsenal of the United States Armed Forces. One such outcome is the production of Israel's Arrow anti-missile system at the Boeing plant in Huntsville, Alabama, for use by both the United States and Israel. AIPAC also lobbies for financial aid from the United States to Israel, helping to procure up to $3 billion in aid yearly, making Israel the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II. Okay, David, does that kind of clear it up a little bit?
In her second tweet, she quotes someone named Batia Ungar Sargon, I don't know who that is, who said, would love to know who Ilhan Omar thinks is paying American politicians to be pro-Israel, though I think I can guess. Bad form, Congresswoman. That's the second anti-Semitic trope you've
David's
tweeted.
just fucking
And Ilhan Omar
dogpiling her
quoted
like
that
all
tweet
these other
and
people.
said, AIPAC. The problem here for people who don't get it is the implication that Americans support Israel because of money, period, as opposed to a host of other considerations.
I would say money's the primary one. Another one is because a bunch of Americans are religious as fuck and they think Israel's gonna be like where Jesus comes back, and so we have to protect it. It's really fucking weird. I grew up in a very hyper religious environment, and let me tell you, folks, there was some Israeli worship in our church, but it wasn't for like normal reasons. We needed Israel to exist so that Jesus could come back, and that was pretty much the only reason.
Which we can debate whether they're worthy or not. The conspiracy that all of this refers to is the idea of Jewish money as a tool for global domination.
But keep in mind, she didn't say any of that. She didn't say the Jews are using their money for global domination. All she said was AIPAC. AIPAC is lobbying the United States to give aid to Israel and Israel's oppressive military, which treats the Palestinian people, her people, like dog shit. David is the one who is attaching all of this anti-Semitic shit to it. All right, David is the one who's going there. All right, Ilhan Omar didn't go there. She later clarifies, she's not anti-Semitic. There's nothing anti-Semitic in these unless you choose to attribute it to them. Unless you deliberately read it that way. But it's a very selective reading. It's one that's ignorant of who Ilhan Omar is as a person. It's one ignorant of, her politics and what she's really trying to say. And it's just ignorant in general.
Including the control of American elected officials like Kevin McCarthy. But here's the most important thing, and this seems to be missing from most of the arguments I'm seeing about this on the internet. Even if you disagree that the tweets are furthering anti-Semitic tropes, that's fine.
Which I do. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, David.
The argument is not valid because this all started as a criticism of Kevin McCarthy, who received $0 from AIPAC associates in 2018. So it's just literally factually wrong. McCarthy was among the Republicans who were spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about George Soros paying for the migrant caravan, which of course wasn't true. So I'm not defending McCarthy here. He's horrible. I've been criticizing the guy for years. What I'm pointing out is that at a logistical level, at a factual level, the criticism of McCarthy as a sort of tool of the Israeli lobby in the United States is not backed by evidence. He received no donations from pro-Israel PACs in 2018, and this just invalidates even the idea of the tweet. Now, is Ilhan Omar personally anti-Semitic? I have no idea. I don't think this by itself is evidence of that. But it's still destructive, not only because anti-Semitism is...
All right, so even if, Kevin McCarthy didn't take PAC money from Israel, I mean, let's just take a look at who he did take PAC money from. Goldman Sachs, MetLife, Citigroup, Federated Investors, Oracle Corp. So the guy's a fucking capitalist chode. Even if he doesn't fucking take donations from AIPAC directly, his party benefits tremendously from donations to AIPAC. So of course he's gonna fucking lobby for AIPAC on his behalf. He's gonna be fucking strong-armed into it. Even if Kevin McCarthy hated Israel and hated Jews, he would still probably go there because he's a fucking sellout chode who will vote any way the wind blows as long as he gets his money. That's all Ilhan Omar was trying to say. That's all she was trying to say, David. She wasn't trying to imply that there's some kind of global Jewish cabal that's trying to run the World Bank and destroy everything. And you're just you're projecting all of this onto Ilhan Omar. You're being just like the fucking MSM. You're being just like these obstructionist fucking establishment Democrats that you like to criticize so much. You're attacking a fellow progressive, a real progressive, unlike you.
Bad, and playing up these stereotypes is not a good thing, but it forces other Democrats to have to denounce her comments, which just gets in the way of
Once again, there's a whole lot of Jews out there that don't like Israel and don't support what it does, all right? And they support Ilhan Omar. I don't know why David Pakman's saying, like, all the eggs in one basket, like you're either pro-Israel or you hate Jews. Doesn't work that way, my friend. The world's not that simple, all right? There's lots of Jews that disagree with Israel and its treatment of the Palestinian people. But those voices find themselves marginalized and silenced by the mainstream media who want to peddle this narrative that this scary brown woman, this scary brown Muslim woman, is just an anti-Semite as a way to sort of bully her into submission or silence, or, as Donald Trump suggested, retirement. So, David, you're being a fucking useful patsy for Trump when you're dogpiling on Ilhan Omar.
Democrats getting things accomplished. Whether or not Ilhan Omar is anti-Semitic, Nancy Pelosi puts out a statement saying this is bad. She needs to apologize.
Well, fuck Nancy Pelosi. I don't give a shit what that old bag has to say. All right? She doesn't have the fucking balls to try to impeach Trump. She's useless. Why the fuck would I give a flying shit what Nancy Pelosi had to say? Alright, she's fucking useless. Again, David, which side are you on? The establishment or the progressives? Because right now it seems you're pretty fucking establishment.
Chuck Schumer tweets that this is irresponsible and offensive.
Once again, fuck Chuck Schumer. Fuck Chuck. He's useless.
And anti-Semitic. And then
he stood there like a little bitch getting scolded while President Trump just ranted and raved in their talk at the White House.
Ilhan Omar ends up apologizing and more political capital is spent on this nonsense. So what really needs to be understood here are a couple...
This nonsense that you're peddling, by the way, David.
Different things. Number one, AIPAC is a more right-wing group And Jews in the US are very, very liberal. So,
Yeah, it's because it's being fucking funded by the ultra nationalist Israeli lobby, you dumb shit. Of course, Jews in the United States are more liberal, but that doesn't mean that they don't have this weird kind of support for Israel. Uh, but this also means that there's not a whole lot of Jews in this country that don't support Israel. David's just going all over the place with these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that he's launching at Ilhan Omar, saying that she hates Jews. It's very reaching.
yeah, there are Jews who support AIPAC, who vote in the United States. But look at evangelical Christian support of AIPAC and of Israel. That doesn't even seem to be mentioned here. It's an important factor. But then we get to the
Yeah,
bigger picture. You
okay, but what were you gonna say about that? I don't really get why you even brought that up.
can recognize that this is playing on longtime anti Semitic tropes and still support boycotting Israel, for example. And the reflexive reaction I saw from many on the left.
But when an actual politician tries to come up and step to Israel and talk some shit, you throw them completely under the bus. So your words are just shallow. Your words are just empty as a fucking uh empty cardboard box, David. You know, your words are fucking useless, all right? It's your actions. It's who you choose to support and cast your lot in. And right now you're not fucking supporting Ilhan Omar at all.
To say this can't be anti Semitic because they felt as though it would in some way invalidate their support of boycotting Israel or their opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu. Separate the two things. You can be an opponent of Benjamin Netanyahu.
How can you oppose Ilhan Omar, who criticizes Israel with valid criticisms that aren't anti Semitic, but then also claim that you are against Netanyahu? You know, if you don't support Ilhan Omar, then you're aiding Netanyahu. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but I mean, I don't know about David Pakman's ability to grasp this situation. He seems deliberately misunderstanding and misattributing these anti-Semitic tendencies to Ilhan Omar. They don't exist, my friend.
Netanyahu and believe that Ilhan Omar here is knowingly or unknowingly playing up anti Semitic tropes. You can be for or against boycotting Israel or Israeli companies or whatever, and still recognize that it's a really bad idea to even go near approximating these anti Semitic tropes.
Then how All right, David, how the fuck would you criticize Israel? How would you go about doing it, okay? If you're not allowed to bring up how they lobby the US and how the US spends billions of dollars on foreign aid to Israel, then how the fuck are you going to criticize US Israel relations? I mean, he's acting like Ilhan Omar just opened up this can of worms that didn't need to be opened. Sorry, David. The fucking Israeli lobby is like one of the primary reasons why Israel can continue its oppression of the Palestinian people.
It's bad for Democrats. It's bad for the progressive movement. It's bad for those who want reform in Israel. That's okay. You don't have to feel as though merely admitting that this was a mistake, that it was either ignorant or malicious,
It wasn't a mistake, it was not ignorant, and it was not malicious.
and both are problematic. And that doesn't change the validity of your perspective on the Israeli Palestinian conflict or what policy should be towards Israel.
I
And I was
disagree.
concerned before the election that exactly this type of nonsense would start flying after the mid.
Once again, where's the nonsense? I mean, do I need to pull up the numbers of how much APAC manages to secure in foreign aid from the US? I mean, it's a fucking fact. It's not nonsense, David.
Terms, and it has, and it's only doing damage to the progressive movement. Follow me on Instagram.
All right. So, that was fucking David Pakman. Here he is talking about Ilhan Omar, trying to explain. He didn't say what he thought he said. Uh, Here he is trying to explain to all of us he didn't say what he clearly said. He didn't imply what he clearly implied. And, uh, you know,
Omar that I have trouble getting over.
I didn't.
so let's check it out.
Let's actually stop there just briefly. There's another example. My terrible takes on Ilhan Omar, where I called her anti-Semitic, is typically the way this goes, which I never did.
All right, David, you did. You did. Can we go back and see the fucking banner?
This new way pointed out data, it
Where's
muddied the waters
banner
when we
you
should
put
really
up?
be looking at something like what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has proposed, and the general to some
Rep Omar's anti-Semitic tweets. You say it here, dip ass. How can you fucking say you didn't say what you clearly did say, David?
must hold her anti. There's another example. My terrible takes on Ilhan Omar,
It was a
where
terrible
I called
fucking
her
take.
anti-Semitic, is typically the way this goes, which I never did. I must have said 25 times now. I did not say Ilhan Omar is anti-Semitic.
I mean, just look. Just look at this, David. Just fucking look at this. You didn't say she was. I did not say Ilhan Omar was anti-Semitic. Look at this, David.
I did not say that what Ilhan Omar said is inherently anti-Semitic. I said merely there are many examples of this same historically anti-Semitic trope of Jewish conspiracy to control, and what Ilhan Omar said referred to that period.
It didn't refer to that, though, David. She didn't refer to, like, the protocols and elders of Zion and the Jewish control of the World Bank. That was all just stuff you attributed to her. That was all stuff you tacked on to her statements as being, like, implied or something. Which you had no right to do. You don't know what the fuck, her implication was. Obviously you don't know, because you're attributing all this crap to it that's not there. You're reading stuff into it that's not there, David.
Okay, that's it. I didn't say she was anti-Semitic.
But yet you did, David. You implied it. You implied that she was being anti-Semitic, and even you say even if she wasn't being intentionally anti-Semitic, she still came off as anti-Semitic. So, David, just own up to what you fucking said. Admit you had a bad take and just move on, and people would stop giving you grief for all of this.
I didn't say what she said is anti-Semitic, period. And yet endlessly, I'm having to respond to critiques for things I didn't say. But let's not go to that one because we have a different one that we're dealing with. So let's.
All right. So, that was sort of his cover up or his excuse for what he said about Ilhan Omar, but of course we've seen it right here. We've seen it right here from the horse's mouth, folks. A really poor take, a really poor really not a very muy caliente spicy hot pepper of a take from David Pakman. He threw Ilhan under the bus, was being deliberately obtuse, attributing all of this anti-Semitic nonsense to her statements, which he did not say, and overall being a total chode in his lack of apology to Ilhan Omar.